All right. Looks like everything's working. My screen's not lined up quite right, but that's okay. We're going to take a looky-loo, make sure we got audio. I am like that. That's just how I be. Always got to double check everything. Looks like we're working. Probably could turn the mic up just a touch. There we go. That's better. Awesome. So while I readjust my screen here, and actually I might not need to, I can probably just do that. That looks like it works. This is the World Championships of Warhammer FAQ document. This covers a lot of things that have been an issue in the game, and we're going to go over it, and we're going to talk about how it could impact the game, and we're going to talk about if it addresses any of the things that I've not particularly enjoyed about 10th edition. But we're willing to give it. Hey, what's up, Dan? You handsome bastard! Thanks for coming to the stream. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about how I feel like it's going to impact the game. I'm not gonna speak ad nauseum negatively about 40k. We're just going to talk about, if it's going to impact any of the things that have kind of held me back from really enjoying 10th the way I enjoyed 8th and 9th. And that's where we're at. So this is the World Championships of Warhammer. Before we dig into this, a few announcements. I just put up a video revisiting Hellions, so if you are a longtime subscriber and you know I do Drukhari content, it is coming back. We are getting back into more 40k stuff. Stream games will be coming back within the next couple of weeks. They will not be every week for now. They'll probably be every other week-ish. And I'm going to reserve Thursdays for both my part-time job and then streaming some other things. Maybe we'll do like rules streams, whatever, get back to kind of the schedule we had where Fridays are going to be streaming, Thursdays will be some sort of streaming, and we're going to get at least 2 videos out every week. We're going to do one 40k related and then one non 40k related. Lately, we've been working on the fantasy side of things because I'm pretty jazzed up for the old world. Outside of that, I think we're about ready to dig in. If you're on Twitch, you're going to get a big spicy ad in the next couple of minutes. I apologize for that. I don't control it, but I can warn you. And if you're on YouTube, say hi to Twitch. If you're on Twitch, say hi to YouTube. And if you're not watching me, that's your loss because I'm the best. This is the World Championships of Warhammer. GW's announced that they're going to do a big 8-team event. Blah 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 blah. Not going to dig into that too much, but what we are going to dig into is this fat fact. And we're going to go through it line by line, question by question, answer by answer, and we're going to discuss the impact it has on the game, if any. The first one, some abilities, such as Death Leaper's Fear of the Unseen, Chaos Knights Forged in Terror, etc., require enemy units that are below their starting strength to take a Battle Shock test in the Battle Shock step of their command phase. If such a unit is also below half strength, how many do they need to take? The answer is 1. This makes sense because it's one of those where, again, logically it just makes sense because it's not adjusting the number of battle shocks you need to make. It's simply saying if you're missing any wounds in a one model unit or any models in a unit, you have to take a battle shock. So it's an instead of taking it when you're half strength, you take it when you're below starting strength. Again, it makes sense. Units with the Big Guns Never Tire ability or equipped with pistol weapons are eligible to shoot in their controlling player's shooting phase even while they are within engagement range of enemy units. Can these abilities be used to make them eligible to shoot in other phases, such as when firing Overwatch? No. This is huge. Add in a minute on Twitch. This is really big, and this does tidy up some of my issues that I've had with 10th. I don't like Overwatch as a stratagem, and we have seen it slowly get errated and fact to scale down its power. It's still pretty powerful, and in the hands of certain armies, it's just better than it is in others. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like I don't like it, is that there are just some armies where they're just like, I'm deleting units in your turn and my turn because of a universal stratagem we all have access to. Oh, your army can't do that. Sucks to suck. Uh, But this does help a lot, meaning if you can't see me when I declare the charge, you can't shoot me when I make the charge, because Big Guns Never Tire doesn't apply for shooting except for in your shooting phase. Now, I will say, based on information I got at Tampa, the targeting portion of it is always applied. I talked to the head judge at Tampa about it, and basically, if you are a vehicle or monster, you can be targeted regardless of the phase, but you cannot shoot unless it's your shooting phase if you're engaged. So hopefully I said that in a way that is clear and concise. If you have questions and you're watching this after the fact, make sure you hit it up in the comments. If you have questions now, make sure you hit it up in the chat. That's why we have a chat, so we can chat. That's why it's called a chat. It's a chatty chat for chatty chatting. Moving on to the next one. When a unit counts as having made a move of any kind due to an effect or ability, has that unit made a move for the purposes of abilities that trigger at the start or end of your move? No. That's an interesting one. When a unit counts as having made a move of any kind due to an effect or an ability, has that unit made a move for the purposes of ability that trigger at the start and end of the move? I guess a good example of that is if you have some sort of ability, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but if you have an ability that says you are treated as if you had made a move, if you don't mind saying that again about Overwatch. Sure, Dan. Sorry about that, buddy. Glad to see you on YouTube. It's a little bit less, a little bit easier to navigate the ads. Okay, so we're going to jump back to Overwatch. Excuse me. Big guns never tire. Basically, what it's saying is you can only use the shooting portion of Big Guns Never Tire in your shooting phase. So if you have a vehicle or monster, i.e. your Castigators, Dan, or your Lehman Russ if you've got your guard on the table, you can only shoot out of engagement range while you're within engagement or while it's your shooting phase. You cannot overwatch out of engagement range, and you cannot overwatch with a vehicle that was charged after the unit made the charge. So if I'm hiding in a ruins and I charge your tank, you can't overwatch me before the charge because you can't see me. Then if I make the charge, you can't overwatch me because Big Guns Never Tire doesn't apply because it only applies in the shooting phase. However, the targeting portion of that applies all the time based off of information I got when talking to the head judge at Tampa. And what I mean by that is, again, if we use this example, if you charge your vehicle into something, I can still target it at the end of its charge because it's still eligible to be targeted in any phase. So it's one of those where half of the rule works all the time and half of the rule only works in your shooting phase. And it does help tone Overwatch down a bit, which I am happy about because that is one of my least favorite aspects of 10th. When a unit counts as having made a move of any kind due to an effect or ability. So going back to that, and again, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Actually, let's pull something up real quick. Let me see if I still have my core rule book. Let me get my. You don't need to see my stash of files. Rules. Where are my rules? Is that in documents? I have a rules file. I don't know where it is. Rule 10th edition rules. There we go. Let's pull up those core rules. I need to see something because that could get interesting. Bam, 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 bam. Embark. If a unit from your army starts your movement phase embarked within a transport, that unit can disembark. When a unit disembarks from a transport model, set it up on the battlefield so that it is wholly within 3 inches of the transport model and not within engagement range. If for any reason, blah, 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 blah. Units that disembark from a transport that either remain stationary or has not yet made a normal, blah, 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 can then act normally in the remainder of the turn. It cannot choose to remain stationary. Units that disembark from a transport model that made a normal move count as having made a normal move themselves. Units. So I would argue, based off of this FAQ, that disembarking is a great example of that. Unless, actually, I think disembarking is called out in Overwatch. Let's find out real quick before I say that. I don't want to say something and then be like, haha, you idiot. You were wrong. Oh my gosh. Something caused it to freak out. Ends a normal move, advance, fallback, or charge move. So I would argue you can't. Hey, I caught you live finally. Is it Calith or Calith? Is it long A or short A? Welcome to the stream, buddy. Where are you coming from? Also, let me know where you're at, because I do have some European viewers as well as American viewers, and I'm always curious to see who I'm interacting with. So I would argue that this means you cannot overwatch a unit that disembarks, because the disembark isn't called out on the Overwatch strat. And even though they count as having made a move, they cannot be targeted. So I'm not going to lie to you. That just made it harder. I am going to type it in the chat and see if I can get it phonetically. But hey, shout out to Greece, man. That's awesome. Is it Kai? I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name right, is all. And Kei. There we go. Awesome, Kalith. Awesome. I was like, because Kei, I don't know. Obviously, you speak English, right? But I don't know how much you know about English and American English, especially. But man, the EI vowel combination is, well, it's weird. So it's one of those where it can mean a lot of different things, but awesome. Heck yeah. So yeah, you can't overwatch somebody for disembarking, which is awesome. Again, tones down some of that, because again, not to beat this dead horse, but we're gonna beat this dead horse. Overwatch is one of my least favorite aspects of 10th. If a model equipped with a one-shot weapon shoots with, and if you don't know where we're at, if you want to follow along, if a model equipped with a one-shot weapon shoots with that weapon and later embarks within a transport with the firing deck ability, can that one-shot weapon be selected for use via a firing deck? No. And again, that makes sense. It's one of those where this becomes the rules as written versus rules as intended argument, and you can't always use rules as written. And we've touched on it before on the channel. You sometimes have to think about what's intended, and with one-shot weapons, it's clearly intended that you get to use it once per game. That's it. If a unit with a one-shot weapon is embarked within a transport and that transport attacks with that weapon using the firing deck ability, which model is considered to have shot with that weapon for the purposes of the one-shot ability? The controlling player must select one embarked model equipped with that one-shot weapon. That model is now considered to have shot with that one-shot weapon and will not be eligible to shoot with it again for the remainder of the battle. Let's double check Overwatch. Just after charge phase, movement phase, enemy unit ends a normal move, fallback, or charge move. So when your opponent's just after an enemy unit is set up, or when an enemy set up. Yep, good call. I just totally blasted right over that, didn't I? Silly me. Silly me. Good catch. And again, going back to the one shot, thank you, Kayla, for that. That was a good catch. I did kind of skim straight past that little section. So yeah, you could probably still overwatch people for getting out of transports. Boo hiss. But that's okay. Again, I do like that Overwatch has generally been toned down slowly as the edition has progressed. If one unit equipped with a one-shot weapon, this again makes sense. You don't get infinite one-shot weapons by putting it in a transport. That is not the intent. We kind of all know that. Again, I understand that rules as written, blah 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 blah. But again, sometimes you just got to apply a little bit of logic. That is honestly how I feel. Playing the armies that I play, I think Overwatch is one of the worst strats and mechanics in the game. You know, my two main armies being Orcs and Drukhari, and just being on the receiving end of Overwatch most games and not really having the volume of dice to make it worth using it most games is just like, yeah, sure, man. I'm glad it's universal strat, but it's not fun. I played a double repulsor executioner list at Tampa, and that dude was able to overwatch with those repulsor executioners every round, and it was just like I was losing an additional unit every turn, and there was not much I could do about it. So I used to main orcs. That's what I did most of 8th and probably about half of 9th, and then I started dabbling in Drukhari, and I just kind of slowly uh, yeah, I am glad it's not a battle tactic. That is one nice thing, is that they don't get it for free and they can't just spam it. But that is one thing I've been, like I've slowly just kind of let Drukhari take over my play, and I'm not complaining. I've had a lot of fun with the army, and I've just kind of slowly become more of a Dark Eldar player than an Orc player, and all my friends make fun of me for it. Okay, so Melta. How does the Melta ability interact with abilities that modify damage characteristics? Bonus damage from Melta weapons is a modifier, an addition modifier, and follows the normal process for applying modifiers. So it's not a damage characteristic, it is a modifier, and it just follows the modifier process. So, and the modifiers basically just use PEMDAS. So if you're having damage, you're dividing it by 2, right? So you do that first, then you do Melta, because it's PEMDAS, which is parentheses. Uh, yep, exponents, which is multiplication. My daughter's right here, and she's like, "Hey, Dad, you dummy, dumbhead." But yeah, so that's how you would do it: exponents, then multiplication, then division, then addition, then subtraction. So some abilities allow a unit to be targeted with a stratagem for 0 CP. Can such an ability used on the command reroll strat? Uh, the reroll is being used in relation to is considered to have been targeted with the command. Yeah, okay. Some abilities remove a unit from the battlefield after the first battle round has started and place it back into strategic reserves. If that ability states it will arrive back on the battlefield in the reinforcement step of your next movement phase, or that unit has deep strike ability, can it be used first round? Yes. When doing so, set that unit up as if it were the second battle round. This does not allow other abilities like the outmaneuver or outflanking abilities to arrive from reserves during the first battle round. So if you have a unit that starts the game on the table and then the game begins, right, that is a big change. And again, I think it goes down to intent. Like, yes, it didn't say target unit or whatever. It just says die. But again, I think it's just the intent, you know. but it is a battle tactic stratagem. And you're right. Again, rules as written, absolutely not. And it is a huge change, but it is, I think, for all intents and purposes, a good change. I don't see an issue with that one. And actually, so far, I don't see any issues with any of this. So what a good example of this would be like mandrakes, right? The mandrakes, actually not them, because the way they interact. But if they start on the table, you can pick them up round one and then put them back round one, which is interesting, right? It's very interesting because that allows you. Actually, let's pull them up while we're at it. Let's do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. This is what you guys get, just so you know, in case there was ever any doubts. This is who you are stuck with. That is not the 10th ed rules. That's the file I wanted. Oh no, my computer is not happy with me. I don't know what I did. Well, let's see if we crashed. I hope we didn't. Pull up that Twitch. Nope. Looks like everything's good. It just didn't like me pulling up that file folder. There we go. Let's just close you. Let's reopen. All right. Beep. Beep. I just want to pull something up real quick. Boop. That's right. I'm not the hero you wanted, but I'm the hero you deserved. All right. Let's check these mandrakes out. So at the end of your opponent's turn, if this unit is not within engagement range of one or more enemy models or units, you can move it from the battlefield. So yes, these would be one that this FAQ would apply to because you could pick them up if you went second, for example. You could pick them up in your opponent's first turn and then put them down in your first turn. But they have to have started on the table for them to be eligible for that. So again, let's double check this. It specifically says after the first battle round has started and place it back into reserves. So because it specifically states that, things that like if you have a redeploy that lets you put units into reserves, they would not be eligible for it because that happens before the battle starts. But because mandrakes and similar abilities happen after the battle starts, you could do it. Some abilities remove a unit from the battlefield and state that the unit will return in the reinforcement step of your next movement phase, but do not make use of strategic reserves or the deep strike ability. Can such an ability allow a unit to arrive on the battlefield during the first battle round? Yes. And again, that's really just a extra clarification of what we just got right there. I know it's not in the theme of this video. Hey, I don't care, man. We're here to have a good time. I'm having troubles with max Terminator armies, especially -1 damage. Dark Angels, T-Suns, Death Guard, Paladins. Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Once we get through the FAQ, hit me up and we'll kind of talk about that. Absolutely. That is a great one. And we'll talk about Death Guard a little bit. They're kind of rough, so some abilities remove a unit from the battlefield, blah, 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 blah. We just talked about that one. A good news for Craft Worlds players and Sisters players. And it makes sense, and I never understood why anybody would rule you cannot. But to me, it always made sense that you could. Can use Strands of Fate, Acts of Faith for on a reroll or as part of a reroll, yes. And again, I always assumed you could anyway based on how everything read. But I guess there were judges out there that were like, absolutely not. You will not do that, which didn't really make sense to me. If I'm spending the CP to reroll a die, why the hell wouldn't I be able to use my Axe of Faith or my Strands of Fate on the reroll? Uh, and I get like it was probably in an effort to tone down craft worlds because they're still really good, right? And they have been. And it's not a points issue, it's a rules issue. Excuse me. But this makes sense. This logically makes sense. I'm going to roll my dice, and then if I want to, I'm going to CP reroll. Again, where it becomes an issue is like with Craft Worlds getting free rerolls everywhere. But it does make sense. If the unit with the Infiltrator's ability uses an ability that allows it to redeploy, can it make use of the Infiltrator's ability when redeploying? No. That's super interesting. I agree, Craft Worlds. Yep, and I agree, Caleb. I think that's what a lot of it was to prevent that like phishing and then just like, oh, I didn't get it. But they have enhancements and stuff that just change dice to 6 anyway. So it's like, man, who cares? Just let them have it. Like, just don't even let them roll. Like, hey, every time you roll a die, you could choose one die. It's always a 6. That's their new rule. And that's interesting. So you cannot forward deploy if you redeploy. And I'm not opposed to it. I think it's interesting. I don't know if it's just a timing issue. I would imagine that's it. Let's take a look at infiltrators and see how it's worded. Yep, it's because during deployment, if every model in the unit has this ability, and then redeploys are after deployment. So that would be why. It's just the timing. Some units, Mortarion, Trajan, Grey Knights, Grandmasters, Leagues of Votann models with the Grim Demeanor enhancement, have abilities that allow certain models and units to ignore modifiers to their characteristics. Does that allow them to ignore modifiers to the characteristics of weapons equipped by those models and units as well? No. So ignoring modifiers does not ignore damage reduction is how I'm reading this. Let me reread this. Does that allow them to? Okay, yep, because the damage is on the weapon and it's not on the unit or model. So you can't ignore like have damage, which again is interesting, makes sense to some degree, but it does create a situation where now we have a weapon that gets its own characteristics, and then we have a model that gets its own characteristics. So -1 to hit cannot be ignored. Well, it can because you're doing it depends, man. Like shifting ballistic skill is a weapon characteristic, so you can't ignore shifting ballistic skill. And that's just super interesting how that works. Because like I said, now we have a case where we have two sets of characteristics on a data sheet and they both interact differently. Some abilities, Path of Command, the Lord Solar Hive Commander, grant 1 CP at the start of the controlling player's command phase. Does it count towards? Yes, why wouldn't it? I don't understand why that would need an FAQ. It absolutely would. And another thing that I did see when I was at Tampa is that the bonus command points that you gain for discarding now counts towards your limit. And I forget what event, but I had some judges I had talked to after an event, and they were saying that after that event, it didn't count towards your limit, but they have reversed that and said it does. So, again, I don't care either way on that one. It makes no difference. I am perfectly fine to let people get extra command points. I am perfectly fine to say not one little bit. It makes sense either way. I'm fine with it. But this one, again, I don't see why it wouldn't. So it's interesting that we had to have an FAQ on it. If a unit contains a character monster or vehicle and fails several hazardous tests at the same time, how are those effects applied? This one's interesting. And this isn't this is something that just needs clarified. Like hazardous tests are really interesting because of how they're worded. So before we dig into this, let's find some hazardous. Weapons with hazardous. Each time a unit is selected to shoot or fight, if one or more models attack with hazardous weapons, then after that weapon has resolved its attacks, you make a hazardous test for each weapon that was used by rolling a d6. For each roll of 1, that test is failed, and one model in that unit equipped with a hazardous weapon is destroyed. Excuse me. Unless that model is a character monster or vehicle, in which case it suffers 3 mortal wounds instead. Note that if you selected a character model in an attached unit, the mortal wounds must be allocated to that model first, even if there's another model that has taken wounds. So it gets a little weird when you have attached characters, especially, because that's one of the, if not the only time you can have wounds on 2 models in a single unit. For each failed hazardous test, the unit's controlling player selects one model in the unit equipped with a hazardous weapon. That model will suffer the relevant effects of the failed tests, either being destroyed or 3 mortals, until it is destroyed, at which point that player selects another model equipped with a hazardous weapon, repeating until there are no. So, the way I interpret this is, man, holy shit, that might just have. For each failed hazardous test, the unit's controlling player selects one model. So it looks to me like they've reversed course on this and are now saying you just pick a single model and apply hazardous effects until it's destroyed. Now, that may be in addition to the character aspect, but I don't think so. I think they're just simplifying the hazardous process and saying you just apply it to one model at a time until they're dead, to avoid having multiple models with damage on them in the unit. That's how I'm seeing this, and I don't care either way. Again, I think this only really affects a handful of armies. Tau battlesuit builds, they're not losing their commanders as quickly from running all cyclic ion. So it's one of those where ultimately I don't think this makes a lot of change to the game, but it does help a few armies that rely on hazardous weapons a lot. This is for the World Championships of Warhammer. I wanted to revisit one thing. Boop, 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 boop. Before we wrap this up and then go to Calith's question. Okay, boop. Okay. World Championships of Warhammer FAQ. This is a great FAQ. It does clarify quite a bit, and it does a good job of fixing some of the issues or answering some of the questions that have existed in 10th edition. The big guns never tire was the biggest thing from here, and I had already known going into. Oh, shit. We missed one, and I knew it was on here. Because I wanted to talk about it. So this one's really interesting. And it's a weird one. And I didn't even know people were playing it this way because it doesn't make any goddamn sense at all. So I don't understand why this was ever ruled the way it was and why it needed an FAQ. But when a transport arrives from reserves in the reinforcement step of its controlling player's movement phase, are embarked units eligible to disembark? No. So, real quick, I don't know why I closed out the core rules. Let's open them back up. I did want to touch on this, and then we're going to get to Calith's question, like I said. Is my numlock off? That's why it's not working. You silly goose. Core rules. Beep, boop, boop, boop. We don't need the Drukhari book up anymore. All right, so let's look at disembark first. Actually, let's look at reserves. And deep strike. Oh gosh, my fat fingers. Okay, is there a reason we're not going? If you are on Twitch, there's going to be an ad in a minute. If you're on YouTube, I have no idea. Oh my gosh, stop. Why is this being this way? You're hurting me on the inside. There we go. Let's zoom her in. During the declare battle formation step, if every model in the unit has this ability, you can set it up in reserves instead of setting it up on the battlefield. If you do in the reinforcement step of one of your movement phases, you can set this unit anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches away from all enemy models, horizontally. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to remind everybody that there is a little pamphlet. I don't have it with me, but there's a little pamphlet that came with your cards if you have the box of cards, the GT cards. That little pamphlet has rules that tell you, hey, if you're playing a competitive match play game, you can't do it turn one. I don't know why those rules have not been put into the app or addressed on FAQs, but it was real funny going through an 8-round tournament and people being like, I'm going to do this turn one. And I'm like, you can't. And they're like, it's not in here. It's not in here. And I was like, yeah, I know. And like we'd go through the pamphlet and they were like, oh, are you kidding me? So that really needs to be addressed. Like that needs some sort of, hey, here it is. Let's put it in the app. So that's deep strike. So now let's look at reserves. Which is on 41 to 43. 41. Boop, 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 boop. There's rapid ingress. Strategic reserves. Here we go. All right. These rules let you place units into strategic reserves, blah, 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 blah. We don't need to know how to get into it, right? We just need to know how to come out of it. Placing units into strategic reserves. Units that are placed into reserve or strategic reserves, blah, 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 blah. Where on the battlefield a strategic reserves unit can be set up when it arrives depends on the battle round as follows. During the second battle round, blah, 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 blah. Starting from the third battle round, blah, 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 blah. Strategic reserves units cannot be set up within 9 inches horizontally of any enemy models. All other rules that apply when setting up reserves unit also apply when setting up strategic reserves units. So you have to be wholly within 6 inches of a battlefield edge and 9 inches away from enemy models. Okay, so where are Bam. 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 We're just looking for the regular reserves units. And really, I should just pull this up on the app. It would take much less time, but I want to show you guys. Anyway, doesn't matter. Basically, god dang, I'll just pull it up on the app. Because I want to read it to you, even if you don't get to look at it. You got to read it. Reserves. We don't need an enhancement or a stratagem. Reinforcements. Here we go. That's why. Some units have a rule that allows them to start in the battle in the reinforcement step of your movement phase. If you have any reserves units in your army, you can select one or more of them and set them up on the battlefield one at a time. Once all your reserves units that you wish to set up this turn have been set up, your movement phase ends and you progress to the shooting phase. Maybe go to... I found it. You're awesome, Dan. I just pulled it up on there and read it. Because... So basically, we all know how coming in from reserves works, right? And I actually had a conversation online with somebody, which is not something I normally do. I normally don't engage in 40K discussions on forums or Facebook posts because they tend to devolve very quickly. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there who just know more than I do. So, and I mean that both seriously and sarcastically. So in the disembark, it just says if a unit from your army starts your movement phase embarked within a transport model, that unit can disembark in that phase. So people were making the argument that because it doesn't say you cannot disembark coming out of reserves, because disembark just says it happens in the movement phase, you could come out of reserves and then disembark out of reserves, and then the disembarked unit could be within 9. So people were bringing their falcons filled with fire dragons, dropping their falcons 9 inches away, disembarking their fire dragons so that their fire dragons were within 9 to get that melta damage, and then they were just doing that. So I think this is obviously, as we look at the FAQ, a gross misinterpretation of the rule, and definitely not with the intent. This would be the third straight edition. I don't know about 7th because I didn't play 7th. I played 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and barely touched 5th, mostly 3rd and 4th. So I couldn't tell you about 7th. But I can tell you in 8th and 9th and now 10th, you cannot disembark unless something says you can. And when I tried to explain to somebody, like, hey, look, like, this is why we have rules like the drop pod, they were like, well, the drop pod says you must, so that's different. And I was like, cool, man, you obviously know more about 40K than I do. I'm not going to argue with you anymore. Like, I'm going to move on with my life. But I'm 99% sure you're making a strong argument for very vaguely written rules rather than what was intended. And, you know, here it is. This is what was intended. And I actually had a whole video done on this specific thing and then just never posted it because I was like, man, there's going to be an FAQ after Tampa and it's going to get addressed because this is stupid. This is not something that makes sense. But then somebody also was like, well, you can also... What's that strat that lets you come early? Phrasing? God, what is that? I don't know why my brain just blanked on it. The reinforcement strat lets you come in on your opponent's phase. Rapid ingress. There we go. But there was somebody who was like, well, you can actually rapid ingress. Yeah. You can actually rapid ingress and then disembark out of rapid ingress. And I was like, you most certainly cannot. And they were like, yes, you can. Blah, 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 blah. It's not phase locked. And I was like, yes, it is. Rapid ingress happens in your opponent's movement phase, but disembarking says it has to happen in your movement phase. Like, stop. So again, I think it was just you get these handful of people who are like super strict, and I'm not putting anybody down because you need both. You need rules as written and rules as intended. But you get these real strict rules as written guys who are just like, oh, it says this exactly. But then when you try to apply logic and then show them examples where rules as written doesn't work, they're just like, well, rules as written. Sure, bro. And I could go on for days about that. You know, I'm not gonna. It's just interesting how that interacts, you know. But it's a smart FAQ. I don't know if anybody out there had even known about that being a ruling. I learned about it maybe a month before Tampa and was just like, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Like, why would you even rule that? And then turns out, nah, dog, that was not intended. Here we are. But I did want to touch on that. I knew it was in there. I wanted to talk about it. Sorry for having it be kind of like a tirade. Kalith, now that we're done going over the FAQ, actually, all my events are going to use this that I run. Now, let's talk about your question, my man. Let's dig into your question about Terminator armies with -1 damage, such as Dark Angels and Paladins and Death Guard. And Death Guard's a whole separate entity because Death Guard is just kind of poopy duty to deal with right now anyway for our army because of the way they interact. And you know, every Death Guard list is running 2 to 3 Plague Burst crawlers. Like there's so many things there that are just like, sure man, whatever you say. So, oh shit. Sorry, my concussion addled brain just connected some dots. Uh the ignore modifiers to characteristics of weapons. Man, I'm gonna have to see how that's worded for the Plague Burst Crawler stuff also. But anyway, there we go. -1 damage. Kalith, it's largely going to depend on what it is you're playing. If you're running a lot of Dark Lances and you're running a lot of shooting, you are going to struggle into those armies. Not because they're that good, but because most of our Dark Lances, unless you're running Ravagers, now hit on 4s. You know, a lot of our stuff went from ballistic skill 3 to ballistic skill 4 if it had a Dark Lance, except for Ravagers. And there might be a couple other exceptions there, but you get what I'm saying. You know, Scourges are now ballistic skill 4 instead of 3. And, you know, so we're already less efficient than we used to be. Sure, we can get rerolls. But then, if your strength is higher than the toughness of the Terminator, you're also going to be -1 to wound. So therein lies our big issue is that now you're going you went from 4s and 2s to 4s and 3s with a low volume weapon. And that sucks. Because you're relying on punching through their 4-up invuln, which again just kind of sucks. And where I've found the most success with things like that is getting them into melee. And I know that's kind of a ballsy ask, right? Like we're asking you to do something that our army doesn't normally want to do. Let's take a look at this real quick so we can dig into hopefully one of these. We can close that out now. And then factions. Oh my, there's so much on here. Let's just whip up Dark Angels real quick. Let's find some data sheets. Oh my god. I hate looking at Space Marine stuff. Silly. Were they Deathwing Knights? I don't know. Everything's so angsty with the Marines. Yep. So they subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of the attack. They are T5. They're 4 wounds. Why wouldn't they be? They've got a storm shield. I forgot about that. And so what size units are we looking at? They are expensive. They're really expensive. So if you can get them into melee, right? That's going to be especially if it's a 5-man unit. Let's look at some things you can do here, because assuming they don't have fight first, you're going to get to bonk them before they get to bonk you. And that's going to be important here, because you don't need to kill them all. You just need to kill enough of them that they're not annihilating you on the clapbacks. So if we look at, and this is one of the reasons why I love your girl. She's my favorite. She is the bee's knees. So her by herself is going to get 2 hits. Or 2 hits. Boop. She's going to get 8 swings. She's going to hit on 2s. So she's going to average 6 hits, but you're going to juice her up. You're going to empower her. There's no reason not to, which means you're going to get 8 hits. Out of those 8 hits, even if you only got 1 6, you're actually going to get 10 hits. She's anti-infantry 2 up. So you're going to get 8 wounds on them. She's pushing them to invuln by herself, which means she's going to kill a Terminator every time she fights by herself. She's awesome. So, Kaylit, if you're not running her and you're struggling into Terminators, I'm not saying she's going to cure what ails you, but she's definitely going to go a long way to help you clean them up. Couple that with the fact that she always fights first while she's attached, and she just fights first if she's not. And it means you can position her in ways where your opponent's going to be like, nah, I'm not charging that. I don't want anything to do with that. Now, once per game, if you need to, you can give her 12 attacks. We don't need to right now. What we need to do is we need to look at this party bus right here. Okay? Now, she doesn't give them sustained hits, but what she does do is pushes them an additional AP, meaning they're going to be neg 2. So unless they Armor of Contempt you, they're going to be 4 ups. Even if they Armor of Contempt you, it's still going to be 3 ups. But you're going to get 30 attacks, right? We're hitting on 3s, which means you're going to get 20 hits. But you're going to be re-rolling, which means you're going to get about 26 hits. Now, because your strength isn't higher than the toughness, guess what, man? You wounded on 5s. There's nothing they can do about it. It's not ideal, but that is 8.5 is actually what it should be. I just forgot the decimal point. So again, you're going to average killing another Terminator. So you're already killing 2 just from that. And I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but now when we look at the fact that they've got each time, blah, 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 blah. Once per battle. Only against mortal wounds. So they can get 1 flail. And then 4 maces. And I don't see anything about splash damage in here. So if you've killed in a 5-man, right, you've killed 2, you're going to get 5 plus 8, because they got 3 left. They're going to hit on 2s. Let's assume they're re-rolling. So let's just assume that they get 13 hits. Okay? They're going to get, let's call it 15 hits, because one dude has sustained hits. They are going to wound on 2s. So they're going to average 12. If they're into witches, they're going to kill 6 witches on average. That's important. Yes, they've like really done a lot of damage, but don't forget you can always LFR to make them hit on 3s if you want to, which will help save maybe 1 or 2 witches. If they don't have rerolls, because I again, like maybe they didn't oaths that squad or something, you're going to save 1 or 2 witches. And then if they want to fall back, they have to make a desperate escape test from your witches. Most players aren't going to risk 50-point models on a desperate escape test. And then couple that with the fact that you get to fight first means that you're going to kill another 1 to 2 next turn. And your 160 point unit has now just successfully crippled a 220 point unit. What I probably wouldn't do, although it's not the end of the world if you do, is I probably wouldn't send Drazar and friends into it. Although it might be worth, because they're going to wound on 4s because they're +1 to wound. And they're going to be -2 inherently. So it's one of those where you can just drown them in dice. That is how you overcome things like these Terminators, is you just drown them in dice. Splinter cannons do okay work into them. Yes, they only do 1 damage, but they're wounding them on 3s, and unless they have cover, it's a 3-up save. So it's one of those where you just need a lot of volume and average AP. Unfortunately, that's not something we have a lot of access to in our index. And that's where our melee does come in. The other thing I would say is if you run Talos, a unit of Talos going into them will also gum them up pretty good. Like, yes, they'll probably kill the Talos before the Talos kill them, but you don't necessarily need them to die right away. You just need to slow them down, keep them where they are, prevent them from doing anything while your other units can get in there. Uh, don't forget you can -1 to wound the Talos, and then these things are only strength 6, so you can make them wound the Talos on 6s, because the Talos is T7. And then also don't forget that you do have the feel no pain on the Talos, so that would be another good target for them. I tend to run Haywire on the Talos and just fish for those 6s. I know that Heat Lances are probably a little bit more versatile because of the, strength 14, neg 4. But the Haywire is just like, for me, if you have a vehicle, I'm just doing damage. And if you don't have a vehicle, I'm just wounding you on 6s. But they're twin link, they reroll. So it's one of those where it's like, if I can get the 6s on you, awesome. And the other thing to keep in mind is, buddy, you got a lot of units with grenades. Grenade the shit out of them. If you get a good grenade strat roll, you can kill one of those Terminators before you even get into them. And your Witches have grenades, Hellions have grenades, Kabalites have grenades, Tank Shock the piss out of them. Charge them with a Raider if you have a Raider and Tank Shock. And just try to do those types of things to chip wounds off of things, to get damage in that they can't reduce. And that will also help you out. And really, if you're playing against armies that have, and I'm not going to dig too much deeper into this. I'll do a whole video on it though, Kalith. I will follow up with an actual whole video. It'll be very similar to the one I did on Custodes actually already. But if you're playing against players who are taking 2 big bricks of Terminators or 3, let's see. Yeah. Um, give them 2 objectives. Because again, if they're 10-man units, that's like 1,500 points of their army, 1,200 points of their army. They can't have a lot. We can't play the primary game. We have to play the secondary game. Like if you go into a 40k game with our army and you think I'm going to beat this player on primaries, then you've probably already lost. You need to go into it thinking I'm going to beat you on secondaries. I'm going to slow down your secondaries, and then hopefully I'll get enough primaries to keep me ahead of you. And that's how we kind of have to approach the game. Is we can score secondaries very well. We score primaries very poorly, and we need to figure out how we can maximize that. Like, cool. You've got this incredibly slow army that I'm probably not going to kill. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to score my secondaries, and then I'm going to try and focus you off of one objective at a time. And if you are running a lot of Dark Lances, that's fine. Like if you have 2 units of Scourges with Dark Lances, that's fine. Don't forget that if you get a unit under half strength, we have a strat to reroll wounds against them. And don't forget that we can just reroll hits. So it's one of those like, it was like when I played Custodes, I played them at a tournament, and I brought my sisters a battle. And the first time I charged something with Repentia, I was just like instantly like, this is super dumb. So I just stepped back, stopped fighting him, and was like, cool, how many 4-up invulns can you make from multi-meltas? So it's also a similar interaction, is if you bring enough Dark Lances, like if you've got 3 units of Scourges and you can throw 12 Dark Lances, throw all 12 at one unit. They can't make every 4-up invuln. When you are playing against an army like that, you can't try and like throw shots here, throw shots there, throw shots here, throw shots there. You just commit whole hog to one, and if it doesn't die, it doesn't die. Like you can't do anything about that. But if you throw a unit of Scourges at Terminators, and then you're like, oh, I didn't kill any, yeah, probably not. Like 4s and 4s, re-rolling hit rolls, and then a 4-up invuln, and then d6 plus 1 damage. Like, you're still not even guaranteed to kill one unless you roll, a 3 on the damage die. So you have, like, after you go through it all, you have a 66% chance of killing one after hitting on 4s, after wounding on 4s, and then after a 4-up invuln. So it's one of those where, like I said, I don't know what your list looks like, but that's how I would probably approach them. If you don't have any melee, you're gonna need some for those types of armies. Witches are they're not great. Like I'm not gonna sugarcoat it and say they're awesome. They kind of suck, but the characters that you can take with them are really good. The succubus is actually pretty good. If you haven't looked at the regular succubus, this will be the last thing we talk about because this stream's getting a little long and your boy is fat and hungry. So we're going to start looking at that. I am. Food. But the succubus, again, she's got sustained hits, anti-infantry 3+. She has 6 attacks, but while she's leading a unit, melee hits, she gives the unit sustained hits. And then if she's juiced up, she gets fight first. So she gets 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, re-rolling, 6s explode, anti-infantry 3-up. So she's also just really good. And then her enhancement, that's what I was trying to remember. I was like, wait a second, there's something missing here. Do we have it? Do we have it? It's probably in the base, not there. Boop. She gets 1 additional attack, 1 additional AP. Oh, man. No. You're probably going to have to rewatch a lot of it then, because like the last 15 minutes, I just answered your question. Um, but the Blood Dancer, it's expensive, but it gives her an additional attack, an additional pip of AP, which isn't going to matter. But then if she's juiced up, she gets 2 attacks, so she goes to 8 attacks. So again, just to recap while you're here, Kalith, before you have to go back through and rewatch that last 15 minutes or so, you're going to want to tag them in melee. You're going to want to make sure you're bringing witches and a succubus or Lilith if you have her. They will, on average, kill 2 Terminators a turn just through the fight phase. And then if they're 5-man units, they're not going to kill you, but they are going to hurt your unit. The 4-up Invuln is going to save your bacon a little bit. And then they're going to have a harder time falling back to do anything. And you can just keep empowering the units to make sure they always fight first. But that's the main thing is like witches are just, they're not good, but they're worth it just to be able to bring those characters, and those characters are good. But again, I'm about to hop off of here, but I will make a video that is dedicated specifically to your question, because I'm sure you're not the only person that has that question. And then we'll kind of go over it, or I'll do a whole big like 1-day live stream on it. I'll probably do a live stream on it because I like doing the live a little bit more than the regular videos. But we'll get like a board up, and we'll talk about how to kind of position things, and we'll talk about how do you out OC them while at it though. Okay, so you don't. And that's just the nature of it. You focus on getting your 1 to 2 objectives per turn, and you just try to shithouse them in secondaries. Right. And that's it. Is you hope that you have a mission that allows you to score 1 to 2 primaries a turn, and you try to cap secondaries, and then you focus 1 objective down at a time and hope that that's enough. Like that's really what it is. It's one of those where we don't, you missed it, but we don't play the primary missions well. That's just not how our army is. And it really wasn't how it was in 9th edition either. You know, we play secondaries very well, and if they have that slow of an army, you focus on taking out their scoring units for secondaries and hoping that you can make up enough points in primaries to bridge the gap. You know, a good example, I played my buddy Zach at a tournament, and he didn't have a lot of Terminators, I don't think, but he had I don't know what they're called. This is Space Marines. I don't know, some sort of sword brethren, I think. And then he just had a bunch of tanks, and like the tanks are gross. Like they'll delete multiple units in a turn levels of gross, especially against our army. And I went into that game and I was like, okay, I'm just going to. Yeah, I've only played them for about 2 editions now. I started with Orcs in 3rd, and that was always my jam. And it is a weirdly different play style that I still try to kind of mash together. Like I try to play my Orcs like Drukhari, and I try to play my Drukhari like Orcs, and it's a weird kind of mashup. But I went into that game going, okay, I'm not worried about his tanks. I should be able to hide from them. I can outrun them. I can gum them up with like a unit at a time if I need to. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just focus on killing every mobile scoring unit he has, so that he has to decide if he wants to use his tanks to shoot me or if he wants to use his tanks to score secondaries. And I ended up beating him, and it worked because he would pull secondaries and he just couldn't score them because he was just like, oh, if I don't shoot this unit with my tank, it's going to charge me, and then I'm going to be stuck, or it could kill me. Yes, they work really well together for sure because orcs give you the thing that you don't have, and that's some cheap durable units that can stay on objectives. And then Eldar give you something that the orcs don't have, and that's more mobility and a little bit better or more efficient melee. Because while orc melee isn't terrible, it's not efficient. It's just a lot of dice. And orc players go the way dice go. If the dice are good, good game, buddy. But if the dice are bad, it's rough. That's going to wrap it up today. I hope everybody had a good time. I'm going to get ready to go get some lunch and do some other things. I hope everybody had fun looking at the FAQ. I am going to be doing, like I said, more live videos, probably back up to 1 to 2 a week. We'll do some games in the next couple of weeks here. I've been working on building out some terrain and stuff like that. I've been working on painting some stuff. You can't really see him, but he's handsome, and I love him. And then also, doing stuff like this because I'm going to a Sigmar event this weekend. I'm going to lose pretty much every game, and that's okay. Yeah, thanks for watching. Like I said, I needed a break. I took the break. I'm really back into it. I'm feeling really good. Everything's going well. I'll probably do like a mental health check with everybody here in the next couple days too to kind of keep everybody in the loop on what's been going on. Other than that, you guys have a good time and hope you have a wonderful day or evening, depending on what time zone you are in.